Okay, let's just start with this number. Take a good look at it. $8.9 trillion. That is the annual price tag for a massive, and I mean massive, hidden problem that's happening right now in workplaces all over the world. So what on earth could possibly cost that much? Well, it's the cost of a broken workplace culture. According to Gallup, that absolutely staggering figure comes directly from lost productivity. And it's all because employees are disengaged. They're physically there, but they're not really there. And it's draining almost 9% of the entire global GDP every single year. So that leads to a pretty huge question, right? In a world full of complex business strategies and fancy tech solutions, what is the one thing that can fix this multi-trillion-dollar problem? Well, the answer, as we're about to find out, is surprisingly simple and deeply human. At the very heart of this problem is something we can call a crisis of human connection. It's like a silent epidemic happening in cubicles and over Zoom calls, and it is putting a massive drag on the global economy. I mean, just look at these numbers. They are truly stark. Gallup's latest data shows that only about 21% of the entire global workforce feels engaged. The huge majority, we're talking nearly 80%, are either quietly quitting, just doing the absolute bare minimum, or they're actively disengaged, which is even worse. They might actually be working against their own companies. It's a workforce that has basically just checked out. So why? Why is everyone checking out? Well, McKinsey research tells a really clear story, and it's not mainly about the money. Over half of people who quit said it was because they didn't feel a sense of belonging or they didn't feel valued by their manager. It all really boils down to one simple truth. People don't leave jobs, they leave failed relationships. Okay, so if the problem is a lack of connection, the obvious solution is just more networking, right? More company mixers, more LinkedIn requests. Well, it turns out that the way we traditionally think about building professional relationships often just pours fuel on the fire. You know, this quote from Brad Englert, a former senior partner at Accenture, is just so brutally honest, and it really captures how so many of us feel. That forced, what can you do for me kind of networking feels, well, it feels kind of gross. And believe it or not, there's a scientific reason for that. The real villain of our story is what researchers call instrumental networking. This is that classic, what can you do for me approach. It turns what should be a conversation into a transaction. It treats people less like human beings and more like rungs on a ladder. And get this, a fascinating study back in 2014 revealed just how deep this feeling goes. It found that when people engaged in that kind of self-serving networking, it literally made them feel dirty. Afterwards, they were more likely to think of words like soap and shower. It just feels so unnatural because it goes against our basic human need for real, genuine connection. So let's talk about a better way. The solution is to stop thinking about connection as some kind of soft skill or, a personality trait you either have or you don't. We need to start treating it as what it really is, a practical, learnable, hard skill that anyone can get better at. Brad Englert gives us a really simple but powerful model to start with. He says you should think about your professional relationships in two spheres. There's the internal sphere. These are the people you directly impact, like your team or your boss. And then there's the external sphere, where you have to earn your influence, like with customers or peers. Just making that distinction helps you think more clearly about how to build those connections. Now, the core of his whole framework comes down to three universal principles. It doesn't matter who you're dealing with, these always apply. First, you have to understand their goals. This isn't just about being nice, it's about finding where you align. Second, set and manage expectations. This is how you build reliability, which is the bedrock of trust. And third, and honestly, this is the key, you have to genuinely care about their success. It's all about shifting from me to we. And look, this whole relationship-first approach, it's not just some nice idea. It's actually deeply rooted in our own human biology and psychology. There is hard science that explains exactly why it works so incredibly well. So neuroscientist Paul Zak's research shows that when we feel trusted, our brains release a hormone called oxytocin. It's often called the social bonding hormone. And when he studied high-trust companies, the results were incredible. We're talking 50% higher productivity, 76% more engagement, and 40% less burnout. Trust isn't just a feeling, it is a measurable performance enhancer. And Google actually proved this at a massive scale. They did this huge internal study called Project Aristotle.
And they found that the #1 predictor of a successful team wasn't how smart the individuals were. It was something they called psychological safety, which is basically just a shared belief that it's safe to take risks. It's a climate where you can speak up with ideas or questions or even mistakes without being afraid you get shut down or humiliated.
So we've gone through the theory, we've looked at the science. Now let's see how this all plays out in the real world. What actually happens when companies decide to put these principles into practice? Well, the results are pretty amazing.
I mean, the contrast here is just staggering. In the retail industry, employee turnover averages around 65%. At Costco, it's just 7%. Patagonia's is only 4%. This is not an accident. This is the direct financial payoff of investing in your people as human beings first.
Or how about one of the biggest turnarounds in business history? When Satya Nadella took over Microsoft, he inherited what many called a toxic, cutthroat culture. He intentionally shifted it from a know-it-all mindset to a learn-it-all one, all centered on empathy. And the result? The company's value exploded from $300 billion to over $2.5 trillion. Culture is not a soft issue. It has a very, very hard dollar value.
Okay, this is all great for CEOs of giant companies, but what can you do starting right now? The good news is that building real, authentic connections doesn't require some grand gesture. It really just starts with small, consistent actions. Here are a few super simple first steps. When you're managing up, ask your boss about their goals. That simple question reframes you as a strategic partner. For the people who report to you, just greet the person before you delegate the task. It shows you see the human before you see their role. With your peers, proactively offer help. It builds up this bank of goodwill. And with customers, try to shift your thinking from just selling a product to truly solving their problem. So how do you know if you're building a real connection? Well, Anglert gives us this really simple litmus test. Think about your best professional relationships. You could go months without talking, but when you finally reconnect, you just pick up right where you left off. There's no awkwardness, no time gap. That's the feeling you're aiming for. And all of this brings us to one final, kind of provocative thought. We all spend years learning finance, marketing, strategy, all of it. But what if the single most important hard skill for success in business, the one that actually drives everything else, was the one thing they never put on the curriculum? Because at the end of the day, relationships aren't just a soft skill. They are the entire operating system. They're the underlying code that determines whether strategies work or fail, whether great people stay or leave, and whether a company ultimately thrives or withers. And that just might be the most valuable business lesson of all.